Welcome to the Fiercely Spiritual podcast. I'm your host, Sandra Ray, and I'm delighted today to have Helen Hamilton with us. Helen is a spiritual teacher, and after struggling through her own awakening several years ago, Helen was driven by the urge to simplify awakening for all beings. Helen, I'm so pleased to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this time.
So I just wanted to thank you for the work you're doing, first of all, because it's just a tremendous help for me. I know I've gotten so much from your writing, from your books, from your satsangs, and I want to dive into all of the things that you're teaching. But first of all, I wanted to touch on what it means to be awakened, because I thought I knew what it meant, but I didn't really think that it was possible in this lifetime.
Mm.
So I just want to touch on what it means to be awakened.
I suppose there's as many different definitions as there is beings on this planet about what it is, but for me, it is authenticity. If there's one word I could use, that it would be being authentic to everything that you are. So authentically that which is everywhere, but also completely in touch with your someoneness in any particular moment as well. That one of the things that I'm really passionate about is this idea that seems to be floating around in awakening, that the sense of a separate being is somehow a mistake or something. And for me, it's not like that. It's a sense of being someone, and it is our individuality and our uniqueness that really it brings gifts to the world. So being authentic to that as well, not being one or the other, not being in trying to favor any part. Sometimes we'll feel like we're everywhere. Sometimes we'll feel like we're definitely someone somewhere, and not running away from any part of that experience or embracing it deeper.
And you obviously, but before you came to live this way, you were living a very different life.
Oh,
And
yes.
like many of us, you struggled, you had anxieties, you were going through what most people would probably call a normal life. But it's being in a state of anxiety or fear or having things constantly coming up. How is that for you, and what led you to awaken?
It was just constant. As early as I can remember, there was just this background fear that was just always there. And sometimes it was less noticeable. But there was just this feeling, as far back as I can remember, as a very small child, that there was just something very, very wrong, and something was going to go wrong any minute now. The sky was going to fall in on me, and just kind of lived my whole life like that, and always experienced lack of things. Felt desperately unworthy of everything, and struggled with finances my entire life. And it just got to a point where I went through a very deep depression after my son was born. And I had a really relatively good outer life, and there was no real reason for it, but it was like this black hole of despair that just wouldn't go away. And there was this search for meaning, that there must be something. I didn't know I was looking for awakening, of course. It's a familiar story, I guess, but just this sense that there must be something more than this. There has to be something more than just being born, living your life, doing the best you can, and then at some point you're gone. It just didn't make any sense to me at all. It's just a deep, desperate search, really, to get away from the pain I was feeling.
And where did you, when you started that search, where did you go, or how did you start it?
A friend introduced me to meditation. She said, you really want to try this. It's quite good. It'll, make you feel better. Because I wasn't looking for awakening or anything. It was just I was drinking too much at the time, and alcohol, and on a downward spiral, let's just say. And she said, try this meditation. And very first time I tried it, I had this intense, blissful state, which of course I thought was going to happen every time, but sadly no. Um, and I just knew that was what I wanted. I didn't know what that was, but I had to somehow. From that point on, I was unable to continue to live without it somehow. I had no idea what I was doing. But that was a first taste or an advertisement of what was possible for human existence to experience.
And from that point where you first tasted that meditation, that experience of bliss, how long did your journey take until you reached that point of being awakened? And I know it was a gradual process, but approximately was it years or months
Oh,
or?
years,
Mm,
probably 10 years. And it's still deepening now. There's a point where you can't go back. You can't ever just think of yourself as a separate being. So there is an end point in a way of suffering, but there's always a deepening too. But it was probably 10 years or so before I, really felt stable in that awakening. It
mm.
was quite an intense period of working through karmic patterns. I think like everyone can um, identify with things once you see what you are to any degree. Everything that doesn't agree with that comes to the surface.
And I want to go into that a little bit, but first I want to talk about, in the past when I read about awakening and I read about, certain gurus and they'd go on these retreats into like caves or isolation or, spent, extended periods fasting. Did you have to do any of that or was that part of your process?
It was part of the process of realizing it wasn't any of that. The awakening isn't any of that, although sometimes that helps. And I really, most of that 10 years was overcoming the belief that it can't happen for me because I have 4 young children at the time and the business I was running, and it just didn't seem possible for me to do any of those things. And it just, for a long time, I believed it wouldn't happen for me because of that. And then I thought that, it's all right wanting it, but how am I going to sit around in bliss all day if I've got to do the school run and everything, So I held it back that way too. All those things are great, and helping us see. But to me, a deeply embodied awakening is going to, these days, is going to be a lot more gradual for a lot of beings and happening just in and around and amongst their daily life. And because of their daily life as well, definitely.
And that's something you mentioned about doing, the school run. And for me, it's something that I often think about. Firstly, will I even remember to collect my kids from school? And I know you don't totally zone out, but there's things like, even little things, the practicalities of getting out the door where it's like, come on, you have to get your shoes on, you have to get your jacket on, just little things. And if I'm in a state of, awakened state of bliss, am I going to be able to manage family life and the practicalities of it?
It's a huge it was a huge blockage for me, and I really really thought that I couldn't do this until they were older at first, and then it just began to, it was so gradual for me when it happened that I just realized you just adjust. There's times when I could sit here and close my eyes and lose all awareness of what my senses are perceiving, but something will bring me back if I need to. Something kind of just, your sense of being someone separate, not actually separate, but your sense of it never disappears momentarily in deep meditation or obviously in deep sleep. But that's not a mistake and it is there for a reason. It's like the software program that runs your life that makes, that has the thought we're going to be late for school if we don't move now, or, something like that. And as it deepens, peace and bliss and all of that become just, well, they're never normal, but they're continuous. So you do adjust to it in a way. So there's going to be a few teething troubles at first, times when you're just so blissed out you don't want to do anything. But I found that if I indulge those moments when I can, then, there was this huge fear that I wouldn't be able to function. Am I going to be able to remember my shopping list and walk around a supermarket and come out with everything that I wanted. Well, I could never do that in the first place anyway. I always forgot something, but it does become, as it settles in, that this is what you've always been everywhere all the time, then it's not strange or new anymore. It's just normal in a way, extraordinary, but also normal. And your human beingness, your life is there to help embody it and deepen it. And everything that we fear about it is seen to be false. That actually function better as a human being, having gotten rid of this fear and everything that was in the way of all of that. I can be a better, more present in my life, more able to react and respond in an appropriate way, when I need to. And it's a huge thing that a lot of people sort of, am I even going to care about, anything afterwards? But you fall back in love with the world when you realize it's all you. Even the minutiae of the school run is not really just the school run. It's uh, something very different, and it's hard to put words to, but you'll probably get a sense of it.
Mm. And yeah, I find even now I work with the angels. I always ask the angels to remind me when I need
I
to
did
do
that
stuff.
too, yeah.
And yeah, like even little things, I might have something in the oven and I'll totally forget about it. And suddenly I'll just get the clarity that I need to go check it. And, little things that I, I suppose you can just hand over
Yeah,
and not have to carry them as much yourself, because I think a lot of us carry so much stuff
yeah.
and we think it's all on us to do everything. And it's kind of a relief sometimes to hand that over.
Yeah, there is that higher help for sure. And today, the very opposite end of the scale. If I'm sitting and I'm just feeling very, very blissed out and I don't want to do anything, but I've got to go somewhere in an hour, I'll just set an alarm on my phone just to make sure, you know.
Mm.
And 9 times out of 10, you won't need it, but it's just little tips like that, so you can just relax into it. And there is so much help there, like you said, um, from ascended beings, angels, those teachers that have left their body in the past. They're all there to help us through that transitional process until it's become more normal to live that way. But it's
Mm.
amazing what the body can do on its own when we get out of the way, how much it can remember and what it just does effortlessly.
And on that, do you find, does your body function better? Do you still get sick? Are you, in more of a state of flow? Do you find that you don't have to like take vitamins, or I don't know what way is your well-being?
I've always been blessed with quite good health anyway, but there's definitely more vitality. I need less sleep now than I did, which is very surprising. I've always loved my bed, and don't have any trouble sleeping now at all, which is very good. And generally just a sense of excitement about life. And naturally, since this is deepening, the body just tends to want foods that are more. Um, I don't pick what I want to eat or anything. I just wander around the supermarket sometimes. What do I fancy today? And naturally, over time, the body's just choosing more and more foods that are better for it anyway. It just kind of happens, unless the things that are not so good.
Mm.
Although I'm in love with chocolate, that hasn't gone away.
Well, chocolate's meant to be good for you as well, so
Exactly.
that's my
The
excuse.
difference being, if I was to buy a huge bar of chocolate before, I'd have to eat it all. Now I can eat a little bit, enjoy it, and save the rest, and that's a miracle in itself.
Mm.
So
That's
it's
really interesting.
yeah,
Uh,
all the same things are done. You might eat a better diet or go for a brisk walk or take some vitamins, but they're out of respect for the body, not out of fear of its ending. It's
mm.
a different place you're coming from.
And do you have anything else that changed? Like, socially. I know obviously at the moment we're not really socializing, but I know I find, well, I'm a total introvert anyway, and I have my core group of friends who I love to be with, but I can only handle so much social interaction. Do you find, has your tolerance for being around people decreased or increased, or how does that work for you?
It's definitely increased. I used to stay home a lot because I was avoiding people, and that sounds weird, but I couldn't take the energy. I couldn't take too much interaction. Um, it's a family joke, I'd be the one sitting on the beach while the kids are building sandcastles, and I'd be reading I Am That or something, and just waiting to get in the car and go home. And I finally came to peace with that actually through the awakening process, that I'm much happier on my own. But now I could spend any amount of time around any number of beings and not feel that urge to run back home again. I enjoy being on my own, but I don't have to be out of fear now or some kind of self-protective thing. And just wonderful little gifts it gives you, like just being able to enjoy being with my family. Christmas with my family used to be an interesting um, event, and just to be there without needing anything out of them or needing them to change is just so wonderful. We're closer now than we've ever been, really, because I'm not demanding they change to make me happier, something like that.
Yeah, and I find when I'm around like family gatherings or large groups, um, I feel other people's emotions
Mm.
and I feel, their tensions or things that are going on. So then I kind of find myself kind of tensing up as, if somebody else is feeling that way. And I'm very aware of it. And I do, when I catch myself, relax and
Mhm.
allow myself to just let that go. But do you find that, like, I always try to protect my energy? Do you find you don't have to do that anymore?
Yeah, you used to have to, but for a long time I focused on, is there really another being in front of me? Are they really separate to me? Because if I had any separateness in my energy, their energy or their lower frequency or whatever was coming at me really seemed to impact me. And I really, after a while, I figured out it's the separation that's hurting, not the energy itself. And that the awakened state, or what, for want of a better word, is very capable of dealing with any energy that's coming at it. And eventually it will turn that around. It's very hard for anyone to be negative around you for very long. Um, and quite often they've no idea why. They just know they feel better, so it isn't really necessary anymore to protect myself. But that is a result of, it definitely was before, but it was a result of feeling separate. I think it's this
Yeah.
idea that I'm here only and there's everything outside of me that's affecting me and everyone, and I think a lot of beings on the pathway are very sensitive to energies, and it can be a big issue for a while.
Yeah, and I've always believed that we're all part of the one, and that in truth, we don't need to protect our energy because we're all part of the same source. But if there's a belief that there's something to fear, then if that's truly believed, then there might be a need to protect your energy. And if it seems that because you've let go of the fear, that need for protection has been let go. Would that be right?
Yeah, and the type of beings that you tend to attract as well are different, in energy anyway. As you're not fearing, you tend to attract beings that agree with your peace and joy. And you were talking about angels before, and for a long time I felt protected by them and helped by them, and to kind of help my energy when I couldn't do it myself, so to speak. And that just, I think that tends to fall away, as you don't need that so much, because you're much more, um, the beings that would rather do you harm or don't have your best interests at heart, let's just say, just find it very hard to be around you, as you're unconditionally loving of yourself. It's got to draw people to you that want to agree with that,
Mm.
and also empower you to just step away from those that doesn't serve you to be around.
And working with the angels, I often feel that they have an important role to play in this awakening process. I know I certainly started out doing Reiki healing and felt very drawn to working with the angels. And as I progress along this path, I realized that it was all leading me to the awakening, even though I didn't know that's where I
Yeah.
was going. I thought it was just this spiritual journey where I was having fun working with angels and guides. What's your thoughts on that?
Actually, something that really, really drew me to you when I saw some of your videos on YouTube, the fact that there's almost this taboo about speaking about angels or anything in duality, in spiritual, in awakening. That, like we were saying before, it's one of the things I'm very passionate about. That we can include all that. A real deep awakening should include a sense of duality. And um, before I get too much on my soapbox, but it it's there are those beings there that are there to help us, definitely, and they've always been around us. Perhaps we're just more able to sense it as we deepen on the path, and that the self as a human being is always working towards wanting more self-awareness, more recognition, and we're doing that wherever we're at whatever capacity we're able to,
Mm.
guided by beings in a physical body and those without a physical body that there to help and facilitate that process. And I went through I was doing Reiki for a while as well, and I fell in love with all of that, and just some deep it just there was always a search for more that just kind of, as I'm sure you can identify with, want to go deeper, deeper, deeper all the time. And eventually you realize this is where it's been heading, but it's not clear at the time. As you just take the next step, don't you, that you're shown.
And I love in your book, Dissolving the Ego, you talk about the process and what you went through. And I love how clear you made it, because often you read books that are so esoteric. There's not really any practical steps. And I love reading those books because there's some part that resonates with me, but at some level, I like to have, more practical steps that you can take. And I really loved how you addressed the things that would come up, because when you were talking about the fears that could come up, it was like, you were reading my mind. And it was just like, it was such a reassurance to know that I'm not going through this alone, and
Yeah.
that you've been there, you've walked that path, and you've come out the other side. And in a recent satsang, you were talking about how this process of self-inquiry, which we'll talk about in a minute, how maybe you've just done it, you've just asked these questions more times,
Mhm.
and you've just stayed with that. So maybe we'll touch on some of your core teachings and just explain a bit about the process that you teach.
Yeah, it to me just it saves time. There was a lot of time wasted for me on the pathway, uh, dealing with these fears, some of which we've already touched upon. But will I still be myself um, afterwards? Will I be able to, run my business? Will I still um, be able to look after my children? Will I even want to? Will I care even? And we all experience those fears in different ways, but just to and for one thing that frustrated me along the pathway was that there wasn't, for me, I didn't really find anything that said this is what's going to come up. This feeling, or even this fear that I might drop my body when I wake up. There's a very sort of popular uh, idea in awakening that as soon as you see what you are, you'll just let go of the body or something. I can't do that. I've got 4 young kids. So I think it just saves time to bring those to the surface. And it helps jump that gap then, that the teacher or the person that's leading the satsang hasn't done anything that everybody else can't do. They've just a little bit further ahead in this lifetime in that process. That's all. And then he doesn't have this. They've done something that I can't do, and we put them up on a pedestal or something, you know. And if every teacher's teaching from their own experience, and sometimes it's because they've gone through those things, they can help people do it too. And just the fact that you have come through it and come out the other side is inspirational, like you were saying. And it just helps people get past the idea that it's not going to happen for them.
Totally, because as I said at the start, I knew that it was possible, but I didn't truly believe that it was possible in this lifetime. And I thought that it was something that would happen, at some point in various, extended lifetimes.
Yeah.
But I think because you are a mother and you've been on this path of awakening, you've experienced all the anxieties and the fears that everybody else goes through, and yet you've still come to this point where you've come out the other side, so to speak. And I know there's always deeper levels of unfolding, but it just it gives, well, me certainly, this light to look at, to see, okay, well, if it's possible for Helen, then of course it's possible for me as well. And that things that I thought weren't possible suddenly are kind of opening up,
Yeah.
and I'm realizing, okay, well, I can, follow the same path. One thing you mentioned was that as you and I certainly experienced this, you want to be in that state of bliss, and being in that kind of wanting to just sit and meditate all day, and having the practical things of life to attend to. And I think I've kind of come through that a little bit, where I can just stop in the middle of doing something and close my eyes for a second and just give in to the bliss, and then keep going about what I'm doing. But there's often that magnetic almost pull just to be in that state and just to close my eyes, and let go of the world and just give into it. But I always thought I had to sit in meditation to give into it. But from what I'm reading and seeing, it's possible to walk around in that state.
Yeah, and for me that was a huge thing, because I felt so good in meditation more and more and more, and my life was beginning to improve as my awakening deepened. It became very painful to not be in that state, and everything else began to feel mundane or unwanted even. And I realized eventually, after a lot of suffering, that was a good desire, that was a desire was arising inside to, I want to feel this way all the time, whether I'm in the middle of the supermarket on a Saturday afternoon and it's jam packed on Christmas Eve, or whether I'm sat alone in meditation, or whether I'm surrounded by 100 people or in a busy airport. I want to feel that same way, and that is not a that's the awakened state deepening, isn't it? I want this to be so effortless and continuous that it's just there all the time, and that's a good desire. And once I learned to celebrate that it wasn't possible for me, or somehow I was unable to accept anything else at that point, and that's a good thing. That's maturity of the awakening deepening.
I think for me, it brought up frustration that I couldn't hold it,
Yes.
that I couldn't hold on to it.
Oh, I
And
remember that. Yeah. Very painful time, because
y-
you want it more than anything, and yet you feel at that point that there's other things that take you out of it. You've got to do certain things in your life, and it can be an extraordinarily painful place to be.
even the other day, I was bringing my dog for a walk, and as I was walking, I was in this state of just bliss. And then my dog picked up something, she started chewing it on the ground. I was like, oh no. And I was like, oh, I've lost it. It's just, and I can laugh at it. But it's like this dance almost between being in that state and kind of
The other
going
place.
another way. Yeah, yeah. But I realized that and if it did happen in one fell swoop, I probably wouldn't know what to do with myself. But I think that's kind of a gift as well, that we do gradually come into that state, which is, as you say, ever deepening.
I think the fun of it is it doesn't feel fun at first, but the fun of it afterwards is the realization that gradual is better. In our Western modern lifestyle with jobs and school runs and families and marriages and all of that, it is very hard to have a Ramana Maharshi moment where you just can't really function for 3 years afterwards. Nobody is really going to be able to do that. So it tends to happen in a much more gradual way. And looking back, I don't think I really would have wanted that sudden, as much as I thought I did. I'm ready. I'm really praying for this big moment where the angels are saying, right, great, you're there now. It just wasn't like that. And the gradual nature of it was much more easy to adjust to, and still get up and go to work or do what I needed to do.
What I've found as well to be really helpful is the questions in your self-inquiry, because I've done, the meditation part and working, the energy work and all the other things, and self-inquiry to a certain extent. But I found your questions, particularly reading your book, and when I read, you have three specific questions, and one of them is, can the seer be seen? And it was just like this bliss came over me just asking that question. And my mind didn't know what to do with it. It just couldn't get around it. So I find asking those questions has been really, really helpful in that process of, contemplation, and particularly when fears come up,
Mm-hmm.
being able to do something with them. Because in the past, I worked with, gratitude processes and different things, and I worked with feeling the emotions and being with them, and everything kind of, it had an impact, but it didn't have the same impact as that self-inquiry, those really direct questions.
Yeah, and it's same for me. It's 3 years later, I'm still being authentic with my fear, and it's like, how much of this stuff is there? When is it going to stop happening? And then I realized there must be something that was still perpetuating it, and that's where my love of self-inquiry came from. I didn't get self-inquiry at first. It was a very weird intellectual process, I thought, and but I fell in love with. I realized it was the openness of asking a question that immediately takes you out of the belief that you're experiencing. You can't be believing a thought and asking if it's true at the same time, or asking what you are. You can't be believing you're a separate being, or you're not good enough, or whatever it is that we're agreeing with, without realizing. And just the simple thing of asking a question and the openness that that brings, immediately you feel different, even if it's only just more relaxed in the body. But that effect then accumulates to a very deep peace and sometimes bliss, as you said. And everything really that I'm talking about is about that openness, that curiosity, just wanting to actually see what we are rather than assuming. It's so painful to assume things about ourselves.
Mm. And it's so ingrained in our psyche to think that we're an individual in a separate body, and that everything is separate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's partly the breaking down of that concept that we are separate beings, because that's all we've known really, for most of our lives. Just that ingrained belief that we are separate, and coming to know ourselves as one with everything.
Yeah, and then if we think we're separate, we think about ourselves, which makes us feel more separate, and then we think about other beings that seem to be other separate to us, and that makes them seem even more separate. So the whole thing just perpetuates. That's why it goes on for so long. The simple question is going to begin to undo that, just to see that there's a much faster, direct way to come out of that. And it becomes a habit eventually. It feels so nice to be in that open questioning that becomes a kind of a constant meditation in a way, an openness that becomes constant and then much more effortless.
And I find it's something that I can lean on. Even a while ago, I was experiencing, like, I can't even remember what it was. I was suffering with something, and I was going to sleep, and I was just talking to my angels. I was just like, just help me with this. Just help me to see what's going on here. And as I was lying there, the question popped into my head: where is the one who is suffering? And when I went looking for the one who was suffering, of course, I couldn't find that one who was suffering. And that brought so much relief. And for me, that question isn't probably something that I would have come up with in that moment, because I was with the suffering, I was identified with it. But when I kind of asked for help and let go a little bit, it opened the door for that question to come in, which brought tremendous relief. So I think that, as you say, when we start to question it and we start to realize, okay, I can't be in both places at once, it really does cut through all the stuff that we think we are and that we've believed ourselves to be.
Yeah, and it's I'd read so many scriptures and teachings and listened to so many teachers say things like, stay as the self, or just be the awareness. And when some big fear or some deep pain is coming up, it's like, how do I actually do that? How do I stay open to what's real? And I found the question was the quickest way to kind of take me back into that place. And at the same time, we're also open for any help that's available. If you're asking a question, your being is kind of open and hasn't got these self-imposed shapes that we're making based on the belief we're believing, and we can get these answers and guidance. And there's so much of it, as I'm sure you're well aware, that's we're never alone. There's always help available. But if we're stuck in some assumption, we kind of closed off to that just to a large extent.
I find as I go through this, it's kind of like an acceleration of the fears that are coming up, because it's like, as I work through them, it's like, oh, let's get all of them out. And it's like, let's just rid everything that's coming up.
So, okay, you want to live like this, here's everything that's in the way of that, to sort through.
And sometimes I'm like, oh, I just want a break. But and I know we can ask for that as well, but at the same time, and I always say to clients, it's better to have it out than to keep it in. But yeah, it's like the fears that are coming up, and some of them are like, they're not even big things, but they're like creating this reaction, which is obviously something I've been holding on to. And I'm able to observe it most of the time, but then there'll be something that'll come up that like sucks me in, and it'll take me by surprise. And then I realize, oh, okay, I need to just begin the process of stepping back a little bit and asking the questions. So yeah, it's as much as I'm able to be the observer or the witness, and I'm very aware, there's that element which kind of sucks me in sometimes. So did you go through that? How did you find?
Yeah, it's and a part of the process of unconditional love was to recognize that must have happened to every awakened being, and the difference being now, if some thought came up that was immediately identified with and produced a big negative emotion in me, and I was lost in this very contracted state for an hour or something, when it finished, it would just be, oh, that happened. There would be no analysis of why it happened and what it means and that I'm failing, and it wouldn't be used as evidence that I'm not good enough to wake up, and all that stuff. For a while, there are certain things that suck us in, that just they're like fly paper, and we just are straight in there, and it's unrealistic to say that that's not going to happen. If we can just kind of accept that, that's just showing us where we need perhaps more questioning, where we've got some real conviction behind this assumption because we've been experiencing it. Once we come to see, though, that I'm experiencing, for example, not being good enough because I've so strongly agreed with it, and then we can begin to break the cycle. Is that true, actually? Rather than just assuming this event or this person or this thing is agreeing with the fact I'm not good enough. Let me actually find out. I'm not just only going to use my experience to verify and validate that belief. I'm going to start to question. And we have to experience these things in our life to show us that we wouldn't know they're in there unless they popped up. And it never feels pleasant, does it? But it's if you can just kind of accept that every human being has been along this same process, getting lost in identification. And as long as gradually, day by day, you're coming out of that, then your awakening is deepening. And it
Mm,
doesn't mean anything if you get lost in this very contracted state for a while. It doesn't mean anything. It just means that's what is. That's how the self would kind of see it.
mm. And I think it takes great courage to be with those fears. And I think about, you talking about the process, and you mentioned at one stage that even though the fear was coming up, you were able to be still in that centered state and, kind of looking at the fears without really getting sucked in. Would that be
Mm.
right?
Yeah, I had astonishing realization at one point that I'd never really experienced fear. That I've always, I know it sounds strange because I've begun this session saying it'd been there my entire life, but I'd never just felt it, ever. It's always with these ideas that it would be horrible, that it would last for a very long time, that it would overwhelm me, and that it was a thing to be avoided at all costs. And I remember one day I was sitting out the back of my house with a cup of tea, and I just sat with this fear. And I didn't try to defend myself against it. It was some openness that hadn't been possible before. Like, what is it actually like when you just feel it to whatever extent you can in that moment? And there was this peace that was still present, even though my body was shaking because it was so strong. My heart was pounding, my palms were um, sweating, and, all the usual stuff that goes on. Strongest fear I'd ever felt, but there was this bliss too and peace. And I didn't even think that was possible to feel those things at the same time. But just because, and I really got in that moment that it's not the fear itself, because it's just an energy. Yes, it can be intense. It's a frequency and energy running through the body, but the intensity is not what I don't like. I was experiencing my thoughts about this fear. And if I stop that, which I can step out of that in a moment with a question, well, what actually is this? That it was really just a set of intense sensations running through the body when I wasn't resisting them. It was a very different experience. It changed everything for me.
And I find when I allow myself to feel even a range of emotions like sadness or
Mm.
fear, it kind of runs up through my body, and sometimes it'll get stuck in my throat because my throat is a place where I would have held kind of energy,
Yeah.
and I'll feel like a lump in my throat. But if I am conscious enough to relax enough to actually feel it, it'll just dissipate and flow through me. And I think what happens is, for most of us, the deepest suffering is the resistance to feeling the fear or the sadness or whatever it is that is there that wants to be felt.
Yeah, because we're so used to feeling these things as a separate being, and we don't often realize the capacity that the self has to be with anything at all, even deep pain, grief, sadness, things from previous lifetimes that are still being carried, that despair, anything that we need to feel can be felt, and it works its way back up through the chakra system back into peace if we'll allow it to, if we can in that moment, or to whatever extent we're able to. There's no failure in that. But just to realize that the self can inherently do that is revolutionary. But just being conscious in that moment if we can.
So, do you still feel a full range of emotions? It's not that you're just in a constant state of bliss, but they're just flowing through you. Would that be right?
It's not so often that I feel anything negative these days. When I do, it tends to last for a couple of minutes, if that. Like the other day, I was just found myself a little irritated about something, and it was about 10 seconds of sadness last week. Just as a kind of a feeling of something that needed to come up, and it's just allowed. And sometimes it's barely noticeable because of the peace and the, so you can't even resist it as the self if you wanted to, and why would you? Because it's something else to embrace. It's another way I'm showing up in this moment. It's not given the labels that we would as a separate being. Don't we really don't want to feel sadness or grief or something like that as a separate being. But it's just it will pass as quickly, that transmuting process we were talking about, as quickly as you're open to allow it to do that, and that can happen in seconds sometimes before you even notice it's happening. Or just sometimes you're walking around the supermarket and, oh, there's some frustration or something, but it's less and less often. But that's a direct result of being in a place where you don't resist it.
And is your mind quite still? Do you have a lot of thoughts, or would you find that your mind is devoid of thoughts most of the time?
Most of the time it's quiet. Every now and again there'll be something. I think as the self wants to kind of go deeper, there might be some corresponding thoughts around that. It tends to rest for a certain while in a place where it's seen itself even clearer, and then it'll want to go deeper. But most of the time it's just quiet. Which was another fear of mine, actually, before awakening deep. And like, is it even possible to live with a quiet mind? Can we function like that? And it's entirely possible. And then you're able to use your mind. It's not that you lose that faculty. It's more of a choice. And then if you need to think about something or plan something, you can do that, and then it goes back into silence afterwards as a default setting.
Because I think a fear that was coming up for me is that I'll lose my personality. If my thinking mind is gone, where will I be? Where, like, will I have a personality?
It's exactly the opposite for me, actually. I feel more at home in my life, in my body, in my relationships than I've ever been. I feel finally able to experience my life in the fullness of it. And at every point before awakening, I was avoiding life, desperately avoiding life. And without those fears and sort of limiting beliefs holding you back, you find that all the gifts that you've come to give in this lifetime come to the surface even clearer, and they kind of have to express themselves. We might have been in touch with those before awakening to whatever degree, our creativity, our self-expression, in whichever way that's going to happen for us. But you don't lose. You've always been that which is everywhere, and you're also appearing as someone somewhere. So it's just a recognition of, this is what I've always been. So why would anything change in that way? Why would I lose anything in that? In fact, it's like releasing all these things that have held you back. Now you can finally manifest that destiny that you came to in a very powerful way. And it always happens to be in a way that serves other beings somehow, whether it's through our art or writing or setting up a business that's a more efficient way to do something than anyone else has. It's going to express itself in a unique way in your and as your humanity. It's you've always been this, so why would anything change just upon recognizing that? Why would you lose anything? I know it's a huge thing that held me back as well.
And do you find your life is more filled with synchronicities and divine timing and things
Yeah,
flow much easier for you now?
absolutely. It's just pretty constant now. And it's not that you get used to these miracles, but there's sometimes there's a realization that that's the natural state of a human being, where everything flows step by step, and that it's been our beliefs that have been mainly the belief in being a separate being that's been inhibiting that the natural state is one of abundance of everything that we want. Um, from an inner place first, all the ways we've wanted to feel, as we were talking about, and then that begins to reflect as your life experiences and beings coming into your life um, that agree with your deep self-respect and self-love and all of that. And it's there's a natural flow that just gets better every day. Every day is better than the previous one.
And do you still have desires? Are there still things that you want to bring about or to be or do or have? Or is it just that you're in a constant state of peace?
Both really. There's I think part of the desire is a huge topic that's, again, it's very taboo. It's almost like, and in and as the self, the formlessness, there's no desire there. There's nothing to desire. And everything's perfect. But you're also appearing as a human being, experiencing a human life. And that is run by desire. There's a desire, it would be nice if this thing could happen. So desires will pop up, but they're very loosely held. And there's no doubt that they will show up, but there's not a tight trying to make it happen. And there's a realization that the desire that I'm feeling for this experience or whatever it is that I want, even for awakening itself, is there because it's already happening. The desire is just the way my body feels that this is already in a process of manifestation, which is opposite to what we're taught, that if I don't really hold on to this desire, it's not going to show up, that the desire is the cause of this thing showing up. And it's really a symptom of the fact it's already in. So you can play with desire and preference and things like that in that awakened state, and it's not excluding anything like that at all.
It's really interesting. So, if the desire is something that's already in play, then we do such a good job of holding ourselves
We do.
apart from that. And is that purely through fear, through believing, in deservingness, not deserving, or is that what holds us apart?
Yeah, you are the infinite self that creates the universe and sustains it. You have infinite power in any moment, and most of us use that infinite power unknowingly to continue to experience the same old idea. You know, naturally, awakening is trying to happen all the time spontaneously. The truth is trying to rush through the state of separation. But if I deeply hold on to I'm not worthy or ready for it, or it's not going to happen for me, then I literally keep creating the same experience over and over. And we can do that for a whole lifetime or many lifetimes till we realize I'm always experiencing my thoughts about reality and myself rather than reality. And when I recognize that, I can step back from doing it more and more. And then naturally the awakened state reasserts itself, just like if you open the curtains, the light comes in. There's no making it happen. It's just a spontaneous thing. You remove the curtains, the light comes in.
Mm.
It's not a question of deserving or not.
Mm.
But we can really feel that we don't deserve it if we've experienced a lot of not getting it. And I think as a separate being, we're so used to not getting what we want, and even feeling that wanting something is painful, and especially awakening because we want it more than anything, that we just don't even dare to really want in a powerful way anymore.
Mm. I find my mind sometimes plays games where there'll be like a desire that comes up, and then another part of me will say, well, I shouldn't have to desire anything because I am everything. So, and when I like, it's funny when I talk about it, but like this like kind of interaction goes on where I'll, think of something and then I'll be like, well, do I really need that? Because I already have everything. And I think it's just obviously the ego just playing these like games and tricks, and it's trying to just take that step back and realize that it's okay to desire things, and to let them come in.
Yeah, because ego, our mind, it works in this either or. Am I the self that doesn't need or want anything, or am I a human being that has a lot of things on my list? And I really relaxed into that eventually, that I'm always, even the word both suggests two, but you're also appearing, you're everywhere all the time, but you're appearing as this human being that wants whatever you want. And that is just as much being the self as anything. And that's the authenticity I was talking about before. It'd be nice to travel more with the pandemic coming to an end. It would be nice to be able to all sit together in a room again. It would be nice, all these desires are going to arise. And for me, there was a real upsurge of desire after kind of started to move beyond this questioning had become continuous. And there was a sudden realization I can have what I want to experience. And why shouldn't we? If we are everywhere, then our life is, and every other being is also us, then our life should be an expression of joy and peace as a reflection of what we've seen ourselves to be. And abundance is the natural state when there's no thoughts in the way of that.
Mm.
And maybe that's our gift to the world, is to live an abundant life as best we can in whatever way we can, to show others that it's possible.
And I think as well, we often hear about people who are awakened who, well, especially in the past, who have renounced, things and physical objects and living a very simple life. And for me, I've always believed that we it's possible and it's our natural state to thrive in every area of our lives,
Yeah.
and not just one or the other, to have all areas to be abundant and thriving and joyful. And I do believe that that is why we're here, to experience
Yeah.
it all in the fullness of being, the self, or the universe or source or whatever you call it. But yeah, it's like a part of me sometimes thinks, well, if others have said, and I know there's so many teachings where it's saying about desire isn't a good thing and not to have desires, but I do believe that, well, where does the desire come from in the first place? And as you
Yeah.
say, it's because it's already in
It's the
play.
self, isn't it, wanting more? And where would we be without the desire to awaken? We'd still be separate beings, or believing we are. It all runs on desire. And if we can just relax about that a bit more. And I really feel that we are here to set a new paradigm. We're waking up in a time in human history where it's more accepted than ever to want to wake up, and that we might not have to, although some beings have in the past seclude themselves from the rest of the world upon realizing the self. For me, there's been the opposite. There was a little bit as it settled in where I just wanted to be with myself, but then there was this real strong urge to move back into the world and to experience it. What's it like to have Christmas dinner with my family, knowing what we all are? What's that like? What's it like to go and spend time with this friend and walk around the park knowing what I am? What self wants to engage in those things. I think there's a new paradigm coming there. What's it like to run a business, or to be a doctor, or whatever we're doing, from a clear recognition of what we really are?
And I have read your book, Dissolving the Ego, which I mentioned was tremendously helpful. Where do you recommend people start? Because you've a number of books that you've written if they want to follow this path.
Dissolving the Ego is probably the one to start with. As a general introduction and in a very practical way. That's what I really wanted from the book, was some deeply practical, how do I recognize the self, that same old question. And the core teachings on which I think you've already referred to on my YouTube channel, self-inquiry, contemplation, and meditation, to really get a core foundation of that.
Yeah, they were so helpful. And you have satsangs as well that you do. Is it bi-weekly?
This alternating Mondays and Thursdays, so it'll be Monday one week, Monday morning, 1 week, Thursday evening, the week after, to accommodate different time zones. So,
And as I said, I want to thank you again. You have had such an influence in my life, and your work continues to. So thank you for all that you do. And yeah, I hope people who are interested in following this path discover your books and your work, and enjoy this process of unfolding.
thank you.
Thank you.
It's been enormously joyful to have this conversation. I love these kind of conscious conversations. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.